Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the innovation stage. We're very excited to have you all joining us here today. We are talking next about the next wave of integrating innovation, and specifically power shift, new frontiers in EV charging infrastructure. Very excited to welcome our moderator, Cruz Casas from Miami-Dade County. Come on up, Carlos.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Excellent. So welcome to Miami. Thank you very much for coming in here. We hear a lot about electric vehicles and electrification, zero emission, and sometimes feels too far. So what we want to talk about today is, how we can break that idea and how we can actually go through with implementation. So I want to welcome my panelists on stage with me. If you guys want to join me, excellent. So we're going to do this quick because you want to hear from them, not from me, right? So this is going to be what we want to make sure happens here. To my left, immediately, we have Tiya Gordon. She's the co-founder and COO of itselectric. It sounds cool. I want to know what itselectric means. We have also Ashley Rich, right? She's the Chief Customer Officer for EV.Pro. And then at the end, last but not least, Anuj, the Director of Development for Florida Power and Light. You guys want to say a few more words about that, or? Yeah.
Starting on this end, hi everyone, Tiya Gordon, co-founder, itselectric. We are electric vehicle charging specifically built for cities, so there's lots of incredible people out there helping people at home and looking for home charging solutions, but there's around 40 million drivers in the US that park on the street, and therefore they don't have access to the easiest way to charge, and that's at home. So we have a very unique solution that is the only detachable cable solution in the United States. So BYOC is what a lot of people call it, so we can talk about that. But our other sort of secret sauce is that we're the only solution that's a public curbside charger that doesn't connect to the utility. We power our chargers from spare capacity in buildings to avoid that sort of delay and that barrier, sort of that interconnection utility agreement that's often needed to make those connections for public chargers.
Excellent. We're going to hear more about that, and our public works folks will enjoy a little bit more about the information. Ash?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ashley. I'm from Palo Alto, California, and I'm the Chief Customer Officer at EV.Pro, and we provide EV as a service, kind of like a fleet management company, a little more new age. So we provide vehicle as a service, so we'll help procure it for you, do all the repair and maintenance. We also provide charging as a service, so whether you got a depot or employees take their vehicles home, we'll install the charging and make sure it's maintained. And then we provide energy as a service and making sure that we get the right costs for you. So it's a fixed monthly fee, so people can avoid those upfront costs, knowing that EVs are just predominantly more expensive than ICE vehicles. So that's what we do.
And our local guy.
My name is Anuj. Chokshi. I'm from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, which is about an hour and a half from here. I work at Florida Power and Light. I'm one of the directors of development. I'm responsible for many of the electric vehicle charging infrastructure programs that FPL has. You may have heard of FPL Evolution. That's the name of our programs. For those of you that don't know about Florida Power and Light, we are the largest utility in the state. We're actually the largest utility in the country, if you look at it from energy sales. And our parent company, NextEra Energy, is one of the largest renewable countries or renewable companies in the entire world.
So he's not in charge of your power bill, so don't force him to answer questions about that. But so shifting gears now into the conversation, which I think is a little ironic, is power shift, because we're going to have to explain to future generations what a gear in a car means, because electric engines, electric motors don't have gears anymore, right? It's a continuous approach, but that's my nerdy way to kind of go into, right? There's a lot of conversation about EVs, electric vehicles, in the adoption in the United States. There's a lot of studies that perhaps say that they're mostly owned and used by older generation and perhaps men in general. I take offense to that one too. I think there's young guys and young women in Miami that have electric vehicles, but there's still something that we need to work on. And we know that the state level, local level, the federal level are trying to make sure that adoption and EVs are more to the reach of everyone. What do you think is happening and how we can help make sure other people have access to?
Yeah, I can help answer that. So how many in the room drive EV today? Right, by a show of hands. Just 1, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So really, just maybe 5% of the room. So we're looking to change that, right? And we're looking to ensure that everyone can drive electric. And one way to do that is to ensure that there's adequate infrastructure and remove some of the barriers that are typically present today in the marketplace to buy an EV, right? And so one of those barriers is infrastructure, and that's what we're looking to change. And when we look at building infrastructure at Florida Power and Light, we look at building them across many different channels, very holistic view of that, right? So we're able to help folks in the home, but then we're also concentrating on public fast charging, for instance, and we're not just targeting the typical highways and the evacuation routes in our state, but we're also looking at a lot of the rural communities and some of the charging deserts, the places that you wouldn't maybe typically find EV charging stations, and we're trying to make sure that everyone has charging opportunities. So there's locations where there's maybe not as many EV registrations, but there's also not as much charging infrastructure, those charging opportunities. And so with many of our programs, which we can go into, we're looking to change that by providing those to folks and really building awareness around the infrastructure, the EVs, through a variety of mediums.
And I mean, every market goes through an adoption curve, and I think, in order to accelerate that, we have to look at who's next, and our partners mobility impact partners who capitally fund us, they did a study recently where there's 90 million commercial vehicles, light commercial, that have the ability to electrify today. And most of them don't. There's range anxiety, a lot of things related to that, but based on just their duty cycle, they have the ability to. And so both with that and also cost, we know that they're more expensive, which is why more solutions are providing services where it's, a fixed monthly fee. You don't have to have all of that up front. They'll help you with charging. It's not just like plugging in a vehicle, or it's not just like, getting gas. It's more of a plug-in, and there's all of these challenges related to it. So I think we just need to look at, how do we help these people take it to the next level and electrify their fleets. We just have to be looking at more of that.
Excellent. So there's a lot to be done, right? So in order to actually make a change and actually move forward, we need to understand what are the roadblocks, right? And you touched a little bit on that, right, from a consumer point of view. But what are the roadblocks for a more rapid deployment of EV charging infrastructure out there? Is it the demand? Is it political obstacles? And this is a safe space, right? This is a safe space. Or is available space available? Or is it cheap electricity? What are the different roadblocks there?
I mean, do you want to go?
No, you can start.
I mean, we all know that there's two main obstacles for the adoption of electric vehicles in the United States, and that's first the cost of the EVs, and the second is the ability to charge in the infrastructure. So we know that cost factor is going to start coming down thanks to services like what you're providing, but also because we're looking at new markets that are coming in terms of cars that are manufactured in China and the below $20,000 EV. Kia is pushing for that as well. So once we kind of get the cost of the EV down, it's just a question of making sure that there's just adequate and ample charging infrastructure everywhere. Despite the hands that were raised in the room today, Florida, I believe, is the third largest state in the country in terms of EV adoption.
Hey, Kim here says is second. So
second?
We're going for number one now, right?
Yeah, you should be going for number one. As a New Yorker, once you're here and you see the number of EVs on the road, and then you sort of see the optics of the politics.
Yeah.
I like to say that EV adoption in Florida is like Florida's dark green secret. It's it's out there and it's there, and we want to kind of promulgate that message to everyone else that EVs are fantastic, and especially in this place where we have plentiful solar and there's other opportunities for charging. Yeah. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, definitely. You want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I tend to echo that, right? I think infrastructure is a big piece that can stifle adoption of EVs, right? And we touched on a little bit of some of the different breakdowns, like whether it's electricity rates, that sort of thing. And so, that can certainly help spur adoption. We want to make Florida a very friendly place for folks to build EV infrastructure to help spur adoption. And one of the ways that we do that, beyond just our own programs, is through some rate structures. And so we've looked at, what are some of the barriers to building infrastructure? And one of those is the rates of electricity, right? The public fast charge space in general has a component called demand charges, which can have an adverse effect on very high electric rates. And so we've introduced a demand limiter, which can help those that are starting out, especially on the private side, to build infrastructure to allow for those sites to be cost effective quicker. Because right now, with lower EV registrations on the road, there might not be as much utilization at these sites. And so to help the utilization catch up and help the sites become sort of profitable, we've limited the demand charges that would typically accompany a site, a public fast charge site. And then beyond, once the site starts seeing a lot of traffic, like many of the Tesla sites, for instance, right? That demand limiter rate would phase out and it would no longer be necessary. So that's just one area that would help it. We also make obtaining a charging station very easy, right? So we have a program called FPL Evolution Home, and for $38 a month, FPL will come and install a charging station in your home with unlimited nights and weekend charging. So many drivers, when they're at a dealership in the state, one of the first questions are, where am I going to charge this car, right? So they have to choose between an electric car or a gas car. They probably can see the cost savings between gas and electric, but just having the infrastructure in place and knowing where to go to get that's where the utility can play a key role and have a really favorable program which can incent folks to purchase an EV.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think, going back to like total ROI for charging infrastructure, if you think about the comparable, a gas station, right? The capital invested and a 4% markup on gas, like that's 20, 30, 40 years. But if you think of a DC fast charger, those are only lasting 5 to 10 years. So we're taking this commodity, electricity, we're marking it up, and oftentimes the margin just really doesn't make sense for that initial capital investment. It just really doesn't. And then the second thing is like location as well. You hear things about, Tesla, and people use charging as a loss leader, which makes sense in a lot of cases. Tesla, I'm going to put it in at my supermarket. People are going to shop longer. I'm going to put it in at my hotel, and people are likely going to stay here versus my competitor. But the other thing is location and utilization. Until we install the chargers, we really don't know what utilization is going to be. People can research and do all these studies, but you just don't know. So like that ROI and location and utilization, it creates this really like messy thing of like, is it worth it?
Yeah, MIT put out a study that said for L3 charging, for fast charging to be profitable, the energy costs have to basically reduce by half. And so it's really like a very difficult proposition to make supercharging a profitable entity. And that's a really good segue in terms of what's topical and in the news in terms of Tesla. And sort of the elephant or the mouse in the room is the fact that L2 is going to need it's going to do what you need it to do for you without the sort of expense and delays and circumstance around L3.
Excellent. Yeah, and you mentioned Tesla. I was going to ask Jade if you just make sure he was paying attention, whether or not he heard about news out there. But in general, right, so to your point, I've been driving electric for about 7 years now. I had a non-Tesla card and a Tesla card. I can tell you the experience of owning is significantly different for long trips. When we're local, you don't need a high capacity, high fast charging, right? Yes, in order to go to Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando, that makes sense. So the work that you guys are doing on the freeways, that makes sense. But locally, we not necessarily have to rely on it, right? So those news are, you have some, yeah.
My question on that is, it seems to lead into, I think everyone in here is very up to speed on what EVs do, but when I go out in the world, they're surprised that my hybrid truck is a hybrid and wonder where I plug it in. Understand the 3 stages. Thank you.
Yeah.
They don't really understand the stages. So what should we be doing to also promote like plug-in hybrid? Because once somebody has that, they're like, oh, I never go more than 30 miles of the day, 99% of the time. Why am I worried? And the transfer happens. How much do we need to work on educating our market still and getting out of our own bubble and bringing forward other better efficiency on the way to EV pieces?
Yeah. Well, you jumped to my last question, right? So that's good. I guess the font is too big, right? So that you can read from there. But that's a good point, right? We talked about, there's a lot of misunderstanding, if you will, in terms of how and when it can charge. They think that we need to treat electric vehicles the same way as we're actually fueling our cars, like going to a charging station. The mentality is different. Is when I go to the groceries, when I'm at home, when I'm working, right? So there's a cool meme out there that says, this is me basically fueling my car on a gas station. And when I'm fueling my car, it's just me sleeping at home, right? But that's a different story. So I want to go into, what are models that we can bring forward, right? In order to have a better education and support for folks to help either small businesses or residents in the area to have better understanding and eliminate that fear that they have.
There's so many different ways to answer this question. So models for people to get over the fear of EV ownership is what we want to kind of get into? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of just exposure. Once you drive an EV, it's very hard to say, you know what, I'm going to go back and get an internal combustion engine for my next vehicle. We're in Florida, I'm going to make a golf analogy, right? Like when you're on a golf course, it's just hundreds of golf cars and they're fully able to make their appointed rounds on that golf course. And at the end of the day, they go back and they charge, and then they're back out. And if you map that sort of analogy to a city, it's perfectly analogous in terms of EVs, that you have these EVs, they go around at short distances. No one's putting more than 40 miles on their EV in sort of like their weekly trips, normally groceries, taking their kids to school, and some light commuting. So it's really about just trying to getting this mentality of I'm going to run out of battery and I'm going to be stranded somewhere out of people's minds, and trying to understand what your actual habitual charging and driving patterns are. And the more people can kind of be exposed to just like that shift in the conversation, and hopefully, we're getting there, it's going to be what we need. I mean, like the key things that we need to kind of underscore is that we're less than a year away from 2025. We're supposed to cap all greenhouse gas emissions according to the UN to avoid basically, calamity in regards to climate, yet we're not even close to making those targets. So how do we keep things very sure and steady hand on the wheel for EV adoption in every state? And we have to lead by example in states like Florida, where we are now the second largest exactly, state of adoption in the country. And so what are the things that are happening in Florida that are making it possible? It's home charging. It's, you say is it free or low cost on nights and weekends?
It's free on nights and weekends.
Yeah, free charging on nights and weekends, which is insane, right? Like how do we get other cities to adopt similar utility policies? And then we just sort of start to scale that. And I think we see that adoption in terms of a once-in-a-lifetime energy transition.
Yeah, and so there's a couple threads going on, I guess, in the room here. So, one, I think you were talking about level 2 charging, right? So I tend to agree, right? There definitely needs to be more level 2 infrastructure. A lot of the cities, municipalities, especially Miami-Dade County, is taking many strides to help push, level 2 charging. In addition to that, it has to be reliable charging, right? And so, the worst feeling is to go to a charging station when you actually need a charge and it's not working. So we look at, our charging infrastructure as an extension of our grid. It needs to be the highest percentage of reliability, possible. And then in addition to that, we need to make it easy for folks to install charging. And so one of the barriers to that, or one of the potential hindrances to that, or I'll say accelerants, is maybe around the permitting process, right? And looking at, all the different cities have different, almost different requirements for permitting an EV charger. And so some standardization, some standard guidelines would go a really long way to help, accelerate, more of a streamlined permitting process to help install EV charging and do more of it quicker, so that people can feel comfortable, when they have an EV, and we're able to create, more charging. But with level 2 charging, it's all about the charging opportunities. And I think you alluded to it earlier, where the behavior of EVs is very different from a gas vehicle in that, if you're like most gas drivers or some gas drivers, you wait till the car is almost empty and then you go and fill it up with gas. With EVs, you're always charging. And so ABC, always be charging. And so, anytime you're at work, you're at home, you're charging, it's usually a secondary function versus a primary function. When you're filling up gas, you're filling up gas. Usually when you're charging, you're doing something else. You could be working, you could be sleeping. So there's a lot of conveniences that go along with driving electric as well. But I don't know if I need to sell the room on driving electric, or maybe I do. There's only like a couple hands, but there's a lot of good benefits in addition to the obvious ones.
Yeah, and my expertise is mostly in like the commercial application. And I mean, when we talk about level 2 versus level 3, my analogy is like the 7-Elevens, right? You're paying more of a premium on an L3 charger because of the convenience and doing more on-the-way charging, whereas we focus on, folks who have these predictable patterns. I'm using my vehicle all day, and then at home I go and plug it in, and there's 7+ hours where I can go and charge. And there's definitely more of that. People are going to pay for the convenience of a 7-Eleven, but if you think about the overall market, these level 2s are going to be the majority of what is installed over time. That's the infrastructure that I think we need to think about.
And that's a perfect segue if we want to be topical in regards to what's going on in the news with Tesla, right? So we know that they've pulled back on their superchargers, and there's now, according to the LinkedIn EV world, that they're pulling back on their level 2 infrastructure as well. So that opens up this world for, again, finding more opportunities for home charging and more opportunities for curbside charging to fill that gap. Because if supercharging is going to be less likely available in the next 2 years, we can't slow down adoption waiting for that perfection of a supercharger everywhere. We need to work with what we have, and that's ample level 2 everywhere. You can put a level 2 charger in so easily. And then to your point about regulatory, if that's the burden, itselectric is working with the Joint Office on what we're calling a national curbside charging toolkit, which we're looking at, 4 different cities and very different typologies, and we're seeing what the barriers are for regulatory in each city, and then we're writing up solutions so that other cities can learn from that in terms of how to overcome issues in terms of permitting, public right-of-way, and other things that you would encounter in terms of encroachment for public charging.
No, and I'm glad you brought it up, right? So to me, the news are scary, right? It's scary to the point that if we don't do something a little more drastic, there's going to be a situation that we don't want to be in, right? We're not going to be able to meet our goals. We need to start thinking more creatively, right? And I think what you guys are bringing to the table is let's diversify the charging locations, right? Let's bring all the gas stations to everywhere that you are, not only one corner, right? Not only the Wawa station or the Target or Starbucks, but the office, the home, where you visit your friends and restaurants. And the best way that we can do that in order to not take more space available is maximize what we have already. On-street parking, curbside parking, and other facilities like that, right? So I think it's a really a moment in which we can start pushing a little harder on that. And imagine if a state like Florida would say, well, you need to eliminate the mandate for inside the development number of parking, right? Imagine states start saying, allowing developers to develop without EV-ready parking spots. How cities like ours, how counties, how private sector can work towards that adoption, because EV is not just about EVs, it's about air quality and better access and a lot of great opportunities on the road.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I mean, it's a little more difficult because we're talking about, a lot of what we're doing right now is retrofitting locations, and that becomes way more expensive with trenching and all the things that you have to do. But over time, there's a lot of development that's going to happen with affordable housing, and if we just look at forward-looking, build, and we think about charging infrastructure in mind, it's going to make things a lot easier over time.
Excellent. I have one more question, but I want to open it to the crowd here. Yes?
Yes, I'm going to play off 2 of the panelists' questions. I think the fleet opportunity is huge, and the economics makes I think the fleet electrification opportunity is huge, and when you think about these vehicles, they start at a business location in the morning, they go out, they do their work, and they come back later. So it kind of makes sense that you could be in charge of your own fueling via electric. So I guess the first part of the question is for Anuj. Have you guys modeled FP&L what the additional capacity you have to have is? And then the second part of the question is this a place where you can use your programs to help with microgrids so that people that have significant fleets can store their own electricity at the workplace?
Yeah, sure. So, on the grid question, it's definitely very important, right? As some of these fleet vehicles start reaching price parity, people are going to start to convert, starting with light duty, medium duty, and then eventually the heavy duty segment. But on the utility infrastructure side, we feel that we're very well prepared to handle the needs of the grid. And one way that we do that, or a primary way that we do that, is around our 10-year site plan. So we study the adoption metrics in the state. We look at the different fleets, the different studies that look at, how many electric vehicles are coming to the state, how much infrastructure is going to, be needed to get built over a 10-year period of time, and that facilitates, our team to look at what's the future generation, transmission, distribution needs that are going to be required, to be upgraded to meet those needs. So I think that, from that standpoint, we feel like we have good coverage there. And then in terms of the microgrids, I can't speak, fully on the microgrids, but we're working on some pilots, things like that kind of help us, learn more in terms of what the utility role should be as it relates to, facilitating that. But we've definitely started really with the municipalities to start projects and do some of these types of projects to start that, whether it's doing backup generation at a bus shelter, using an actual school bus, for instance, or for instance, like with the city of West Palm Beach, we purchased 5 electric school buses, and the buses are being used as a transportation resource, but then during times of peak demand, they're actually being used as a grid resource because they're backfeeding using vehicle to the grid. So that kind of touches a little bit on the microgrid without maybe the solar. But we're definitely looking at those emerging technologies and looking at how we can best leverage those technologies for the future and help incorporate EVs, batteries, you name it, kind of into that.
And I know it's a little challenging here with the noise. When I try to speak up a little louder, but it's a good question, right, about fleets, right? How we handle that, right? And I think it's a challenge, right? You heard from our mayor this morning. We have fully electric heavy rail, of course, makes sense. Fully electric automated people mover, of course, makes sense. We're now fully electric buses and actually launching a full electric bus rapid transit. We're going to be putting a lot of demand in the network, right? And we're asking people to get more, cars, and we're talking about fleets. And I think that's the question, right? Has there an analysis about the network, the infrastructure available today, the power available, is going to be able to sustain? What do we need to do?
Yeah, so in terms of the power, right, the actual, distribution capacity, that sort of thing, that's not necessarily like public knowledge. It's also, it's a bit of a moving thing. Everything's sort of a snapshot in time. So, there could be capacity available one day, and then, 2 or 3 other people could come and take up some of that capacity. So we look at it case by case, project by project as that goes. But in terms of fleets, I mean, that's a good kind of segue into, we think of like fleets as businesses and things like that, but here, like for instance, in Miami-Dade County, with the public school system, they're actually already purchasing like 60 school buses. And we've helped them with charging infrastructure, but many of those bus depots are actually getting completed today. And we did very similar studies. We looked at, is there capacity available? What were the distribution upgrades that were required? And then we helped facilitate some of that with them. As the power company, that's our role, right, to help facilitate and bring power to these areas. But we definitely don't feel like we're grid constrained at all, really. And even in the rural areas, we feel pretty confident that because of our 10-year site planning, we're able to easily accommodate the needs of the future as it relates to the electricity.
All right, so it's a little quiet right now, so perhaps you can hear better. Is any other questions available out there? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Anuj, Sam from Arcal's Elixir. Nice to see you here. Question for you guys in terms of charging infrastructure. Have you guys all looked at tapping into the utility directly, which I know you guys obviously do, or looking at ESS systems, battery-based solutions that trickle charge overnight or incrementally throughout the day, discharge at high speed rates? There's obviously a lot of analysis that goes into that in terms of cost, but also battery infrastructure and battery degradation over time. Is there any determination if one or the other is better and where we are at on that?
So It was a little hard to hear, but I think I got the gist of it. So, we've looked at both battery, I guess affecting it by batteries to help mitigate demand charges as well as the rate side of things. And really right now the rates is probably the better way to go, but the battery technology is coming down as well in the future, and that should be able to help with things like, peak shifting, demand shaving, things like that will help, be more cost effective to roll out the infrastructure. And I think that's what you're generally kind of getting at, is like what can help mitigate, putting infrastructure in the ground, not just for vehicles, but in this case it's for marine applications. And so using both of those, whether it's your traditional batteries or some flywheel technology that's coming out that can help mitigate the need for like distribution upgrades and that sort of thing. But in our service area, we just haven't seen the actual benefits of some of that yet because the infrastructure is there. I think if you're in an area where you can't get like three-phase power or something like that, that's where some of these applications could really benefit. And they have, definitely in other states. There's certainly a place for those, and those technologies need to exist.
All right, so you're probably going to hear later today from Gabe Klein at the end, about some of the things that Europe is doing and some of the things that we can adapt here in terms of curbside charging. I would love to. I know you promised me you're going to bring your cable with you that you carry with you every single time. I'm gonna look the other way, but could you explain a little bit more about how do you plug your cable to the curb?
Yeah. So It's Electric offers a detachable cable solution. So I like to think about it this way. I flew in from Brooklyn to be here today. I'm sure a lot of other people came in from out of state. And when you're going to the airport, you put your phone in your pocket and you throw your charger in your bag and you're at the airport and you can plug in anywhere there's a socket. Imagine a world in which you cannot do that, where the only way you can charge your phone at the airport is to find like those two janky kiosks that have like the cables attached to them, and one is usually frayed and one is usually an Android, and so you're totally screwed. And that's the world of public EV charging right now, right? Is you've got to get there, you've got to hope it's working, and then the first thing that you find is usually that cable is broken. Yeah. People charge, they get impatient with redocking that cable back into the attached cable onboard solution, and they just drop it on the ground. That cable gets basically, the clips get broken off, and then that charger is often down for weeks or months in some cases. So by importing, we like to say detachable cables, not weird, just European. So by importing a detachable cable solution to the United States, you just put the cable in the back seat of your car. I'm sorry I don't have it with me. It's in my suitcase.
You promise.
You should have it in my suitcase. But it's really easy. It's lightweight, it's portable, it expands. So it's basically, I fit it in a tote bag. And this way you can pull up to any number of what will be a ubiquitous amount of sockets in the city, otherwise known as a detachable cable charger or a case B in the case of if you're using an SAE standard for anyone who wants to nerd out. And then you're able just to plug in, and this really makes things a lot easier. Also because we're looking to install chargers on residential blocks. We don't want to be on commercial blocks. We want to be basically your home charging solution when you don't have a garage and when you park on the street. So it's really important to kind of keep in mind the benefits of detachable cable for that reason. Just for quick numbers, there's 22,000 curbside charging ports in the UK. And there's 100 in New York City, that's a public charger. There's around 7,000 in LA, and the reason for that is that the accessory feed, the power that goes just below the sidewalk and goes to the streetlights and the lampposts in London, in UK, in Paris, and in just LA and nowhere else in the United States is all 220, 240. So it's the right power to easily retrofit existing street furniture into chargers. But everywhere else, we have to find different solutions. So that's where we come in.
I think that's fascinating, right? And when I look at it, more residential areas throughout Miami-Dade County and areas that don't have garages, well, I don't know if you know, but at least here in Florida, I can tell you this, people use the garage to store stuff, right? The car is never inside the garage. It's always outside, right? So, and I think that's some of the elements that we need to start bringing. What are those options that can help make sure that we have charging at home at ease and we don't get with this idea about the range anxiety, right, that we've seen before. We have another 10 minutes or so, maybe a little less. Another thing that I wanted, this is more about me too, is when we talk about electric, to me, we can learn from all the things that we've done in our lives, right? We were raised and we were trained to recycle. Put that into perspective, right? Recycle, recycle. What people don't realize, actually, it's the last thing you should do, is first you reduce, you reuse, and you recycle, right? So when we think about electric, I want to be the last thing we do. The first thing is go on transit or use share rides, or even let's try and figure out a way to reduce the size of the vehicle, right? So a truck doesn't have to be a truck, can be a little bicycle with cargoes attached to it, right? New York and London doing a lot of great things, right? So is there a future when we start seeing smaller vehicles like the one that we have outside here from Dutch X and Fernhay, and how we can allow for those things to happen, swappable batteries, charging in the right of way, how that can coexist with the solutions that you guys bring?
Sorry, I mean, it's when people are considering mobility in the future, as we've heard earlier, you know, the number of vehicle miles traveled for people who live in cities is very low. And it's just about kind of a mindset shift in terms of how we, like you said, like reduce, reuse, recycle. So first things first, if I'm going 2 miles, am I going to get in my large truck and drive 2 miles, or can I get into a smaller mode of transportation that's electric and get me there? But the thing that you need to do to make sure that you can do that is you need to make sure that it's safe. And that's sort of like the chicken or egg with bike lanes, right? I'm a New Yorker. I've been hit by a car twice on my bike, and I've lived to tell the tale. Anyone wants to swap stories at lunch, please come find me. I am very proud of surviving that for some reason. But now in New York City, if you had said to me in 2000 that we're going to have protected bike lanes across half the city of New York, I would tell you that you're insane. But we do. And now it's very easy to make that choice to get on a bike. So how do we make it very easy to make that choice of getting a smaller vehicle? You know what I mean? Like again, if you just need to carry yourself and some groceries 3 miles, why are we basically burning fossil fuels to do this? So this is sort of the mindset shift, but it's a hard one. And it's one that we have to really kind of change 80 years of behavior in order to accomplish. And that's, I think, going to happen not necessarily by shifting people who have already driven internal combustion engines for 40 years, but by basically hopefully getting that next generation in and helping them to kind of start on better habits as well. So there's a lot that can happen in terms of innovation and bringing in next generations of civilians in cities to move that forward, if it's going to be hard to convert the people that are in this room from habits that they have.
And you're right. And the one thing I can tell you, right? So not only we were driving, you know, like a mile or less to go get a burrito, now actually it's the other way around. Now we order and it comes, you know, an order of chicken wings on an Uber Eats or something like that in a car, right? So how we can actually incentivize those smaller vehicles. And you're right, we need the right infrastructure in order to feel safe. We're starting that right now here in downtown Miami with a full network of separated and protected bike lanes just outside of this venue. So, you know, we're starting to look at that, and we're looking for ways that we can actually support, right, first and last mile deliveries, right? Imagine, I'm just gonna say imagine, right, that you have, Hendrix, a transfer hub just a mile north of downtown Miami where all the packages can go to, you imagine, you have it. So yes, all those packages can go to the transfer hub and then being delivered via bikes, right? In a section that already have a bike lane in front of it, right? So I think that's the future, right? And we're going to be looking at that moving forward. So with that said, do you guys want to, one more question and then we can jump into final thoughts? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Matt. I'm doing a transportation fellowship working with the Department of the Interior. And so we're trying to identify locations that are exceedingly rural. So it's really good to hear you talk about that from Florida's perspective. And a lot of them are more recreation focused, but we also want to be cognizant of the communities that are surrounding those federal public lands. And so my question is, are there any best practices for siting charging stations in very rural locations that are traditionally seen as more recreation focused? How can they be also useful for the community around them Sometimes those parks close at night, so do they have to be accessible 24/7 to be successful? Just curious your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think one of the best practices, of course, to find the power, to build near near the power. That's probably the first step. But then in general, I think focusing on those rural areas and having companies kind of look at it from a different lens. And a good example of that is maybe Rivian. So Rivian looked at launching their adventure network and their other network in national, federal, state parks, community parks to help provide charging in different areas for sort of a different demographic of folks. But when you look at enabling corridors and opening up corridors, we looked to like the Florida Master Plan, and we looked at what were the identified corridors, and we also even looked at some of the more minor corridors of where we need to unlock charging to enable travel that isn't typically available, and then look at building infrastructure in those areas. And the benefit to many of these areas is certainly the traffic that it can bring in a positive way, right? So if you're citing a charging station, typically it's going to take some time, right, if you're going to be charging, so you need 20-30 minutes of something to do. So finding a good amenity like a park or a quick service restaurant, a coffee shop, a local business that people can take advantage of while their vehicle is charging, sort of that secondary function I talked about earlier, that's always a benefit, in those cases.
Yeah, I want to bring attention to an amazing nonprofit called Adopt a Charger, if you haven't heard of them. So they partner with national parks, and then they bring in a corporate sponsor to pay for that charger to be installed in the parking lot or in the sort of side of the road charging, parking locations of all the national parks, so that there can be charging. Because often when you're going to these rural locations and you're going to be hiking, there's not any charging infrastructure. So Adopt a Charger is an amazing organization that I encourage everyone to look into. They're not only basically putting in new charging infrastructure, but they're calling out charging infrastructure that's been sitting there broken for years that's preventing people from being able to charge at these rural locations. So they're doing really good work.
All right, it's electric. The conversation is electric. It's a lot going on. I'm enthusiastic about the future of zero emission for Miami-Dade County, for New York, for LA, for this nation moving forward, and something that will be more sustainable on that side. Before we thank them with a round of applause, you want to say final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think in Florida at least, right, we've really tried to build a benchmark, a model for how electrification should work. We've come up with some really holistic solutions to help customers, help the residents, help all the constituents of the state, electorate, even visitors of the state. And so, I think we want to continue that, encourage that, and hope that we continue, and maybe one day we'll get to number one.
And clean energy too, right? So that's for another panel.
Yeah, I mean, for me, our focus is commercial adoption, and it's just like the cheesy saying, like, the more people that adopt, the easier things are going to get. Charging infrastructure is going to be better. Figuring out, parts and service and maintenance for EVs, trying to get to a lower cost of EVs in general. Like, it just takes, mass adoption. So it's just going to take some time.
Yeah, I'm going to underscore adoption, and that it's this community at CoMotion that is obviously looking for the way to electrify transportation. And so even when we have sort of like these sort of David and Goliath moments right now that's happening with Tesla, we have to understand that there's lots of smaller entities here that can still make this transition happen, and that there needs to be a narrative that, that we need to not let this basically create any kind of bump or hindrance in the overall trajectory that we're on for EV adoption. We need to keep going forward and not sort of delay, because unfortunately a very major player is sort of shifting priorities. There's still plenty of sort of an undercurrent that's going to help move this all forward, and everything needs to keep on track and not stop.
Keep on track, keep on momentum here. Adoption. Thank you very much, our panelists in here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We're going to be rolling right into the next conversation. Really excited. This will be a conversation about meeting at the crossroads of long-range regional plans and fast-moving emerging mobility. And it's my pleasure to announce the moderator for this panel, Miss Aileen Bouclet.
Well, hello. How's everyone doing? You can't hear me? All right, I'm going to try to talk as loud as I can. I don't know that I can close the doors, but I'm going to talk as loud as I can. I'm not in control of the doors, but I'm going to talk as loud as I can. All right, so I'm really excited about this panel. I want to welcome my colleagues from across the nation. Jesse, Executive Director, Southern California Association of Governments, please come and join us. Grace Gallucci, Executive Director and CEO of the Cleveland Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency, and Michael Dunn, Executive Director of R1 Planning Council. This panel is all things regional planning, technology, collaboration, coordination, and working through the various sectors of public-private partnerships and coordination. So I'm going to join them on stage. I guess I have my own microphone there. All right, let's begin. I'm going to ask Comey, can you just do a brief self-introduction, the three of you?
Thanks, Eileen. Well, good morning. Okay, that's a test. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, we got them. So my name is Comey Ajise. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern California Association of Governments, otherwise known as SCAG. SCAG is the largest metropolitan organization in the country. And I have to say that it's in my contract. We have a region of 19 million people, 191 cities and 6 counties. And the region itself is probably, in terms of GDP, about the 16th largest economy in the world. We cover all of regional planning for the region, required by both federal and state law, and have a staff of about 200, maybe 207 people. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Comey. Grace.
Nope, I got it back. Nope. Grace Gallucci. I'm the Executive Director of NOACA, the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency. We are the MPO for Greater Cleveland. We're the largest MPO in Ohio, and we serve 2.1 million people in 5 counties. And we are predominantly focused on transportation, environmental, and economic development planning.
Michael.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? All right, it's loud in here. Good morning, everyone. Michael Dunn, I'm the Executive Director of what we call the Rockford MPO. We're the second largest MPO in Illinois, but contiguous with Chicago. So we're right outside the Chicago market and about an hour to Madison and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we have a number of markets around us. Like Grace, we focus on other items than transportation, which I think sets us up really quite nicely for a lot of the current federal policy and state policy where it's not really transportation first, but it's imposed on us as a transportation planning organization, and I can get into that a little bit. We're about 50 employees, represent about 1 million people, so we're a mid-market, and we focus on housing, environment, economic development, and transportation.
Well, thank you for that. Can you guys hear me on this one? Excellent. So really welcome to this panel. These are my colleagues across the nation. My name, again, is Aileen Bouclet. I'm the Executive Director of the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization. We are the largest metropolitan planning organization in the state of Florida. We collaborate nationally on many of common issues that we deal with. So I'm going to kick off with Michael. If you can please set the stage for the audience a little bit about the space that we occupy in the industry from the perspective of metropolitan planning and regional planning, why we intersect transportation with the economy, with housing and the environment. If you could just set the stage for us on that.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. So we go back to the 1960s, federal requirement due to the size of our community. We're federally required and federally certified and federally funded to do long-range transportation planning looking out 20 to 40 years. In that, it's a unique design. We're governed locally. So our local elected leaders are the ones that govern us and set regional policy that we then message up to a state and federal level. And we manage through what's called the TIP, how federal and state dollars are being spent on our transportation priorities to satisfy that planning. They give us a little sugar at the end of the day, and they give us money to then dole out for construction to try to implement some of that planning or induce that planning. That has been the history, but while regional policy set locally, and that's a wonderful thing, it's great to work with local mayors and local county executives, the federal policy has changed dramatically where they're putting more and more onus on us to look at housing impacts, to look at economic development impacts, to look at especially at sustainability and environmental impacts. And so it requires a staff that can cross-collaborate amongst the subject matters. Unique to us is our downtown is quickly losing all, and I'm to much larger metros, losing all of its office square footage. And so we have a lot of these 50 to 100-year-old office towers that are all going residential. And so it's a challenge to us in how do we look at a downtown and a central business district with one-way streets and curbside set up for office use. How do we transition from a daytime population that we're serving mobility issues on to a nighttime population? Right? Those mobility issues are drastically different for us. Curb management strategies are something we're looking at big time. And, in addition to that, we're trying to understand, if you're looking at 2055, what are the technology underpinnings that our public works and county highway departments, and I'll get to challenges in a bit, but how do those local agencies afford the technology that is needed? Because like anything, whether it was the internet or the cell phone or having cameras on our cell phone, the private sector is driving this innovation. They're driving this technological adoption by consumers, and government always lags. So as a government entity that's charged with planning 30 years out, how are we going to keep government at that pace? The last thing I would say, is, we're traditionally rooted in safety. I heard some of that this morning, right? Safety is our foremost priority, as it should be. But our local leaders are now saying that, safety, but we want to understand economic impact. So as an agency, we're now prioritizing projects, unfortunately, less so on safety. Again, safety is always the underpinning, but we now have to really understand, how does this impact our housing market? How does this impact economic development? How will government get a tax-based growth because of this priority? We were in the Wall Street Journal, our community, Little Old Rockford was in the Wall Street Journal a week ago as the hottest housing market in the country by Realtor.com. We were in the Chicago Tribune as, hey, Chicago, you need to move to Rockford. So we're getting a lot of national media, and that puts even more stress on our economic development systems.
Thank you, Michael. These are core common issues that we're all dealing with in our regions. Thank you, Michael, for setting the stage. I'm going to move over to Comey. Let's get right into it. Technology, new and emerging technology. How are you integrating this in your overall metropolitan planning process through the various, core issues that we're all dealing with in our plans?
Thanks, Eileen. So I think Michael sort of set it up real well about what we do as MPOs. Our job mainly is to serve the need of our member agencies. In our case, with 191 cities, as you can imagine, not all of them are the city of Los Angeles. While LA is the biggest city in my region, I have a lot of cities that are under population of 20,000. At least 20% of my cities have populations of less than 20,000. And so their need for technology is no less important as the need of the largest cities. And that's where MPOs come in. So we feel like our role is really to create the economies of scale, to be the force multiplier and bring technologies to those small entities such that they can do their jobs well. And so we do a lot of examination of technologies on their behalf. One of the first things we've done over the last 4 years is to establish an emerging technology committee of members of my board just to engage them in technology, but more so to engage them in technology that's relevant to the operations of their various cities and counties. So in doing that, we basically set up a program called the Future Communities Initiative, which was intended to start to look at municipal operations from the standpoint of technology. How do you make more efficient what cities already do? How do you increase their capacity to get done more than they really can afford to do right now? So one example is we give out grants at SCAG, and so we created a grant program for this Future Communities Initiative, and so we funded things like fleet management. So if you have a building inspector going out, how is that optimized? How are those trips optimized amongst building inspectors, and what kind of vehicles they use? So trying to get their fleet telematics and optimizing their route management with technology was one of the things that we were able to fund. And so we do this on a sort of like coalition of the willing type approach. So you put out a grant. I have 191 cities, but not all of them can apply for all the grants. So you might get 6 or 8 of them. And so what comes out of the use of that grant becomes an item that we can scale then across the region. And so we integrate those kinds of findings in the work that others can do, and it becomes part of our planning process. We also use technology. We also brought about some technology in our modeling, for example, trying to bring, moving to the cloud was one of the things we did about 4 years ago. Our model, the SCAG model, is probably one of the largest models you'll find anywhere on the planet because we have to simulate 19 million people moving daily to try and run a model. Takes a few days to run that model. And so being able to get that on the cloud was also a technological innovation that we were able to do, and then have it available to each city such that they can use it to do their land development, whether they need to qualify a land development under the California Environmental Quality Act, which is equal to the NEPA process at the federal level. We do CEQA process in the California. And so using our model and having it available readily to our cities is also something that we did. In building our plan, just to close out, in building our regional transportation plan, which we all have to do every 4 years because the federal government says so, and it's required by my state as well. In building our plan, we also engaged in a lot of the use of technology, bringing in some data, huge, big data like streetlights and CDN, to use them for analytics on things like predictive modeling. So we're using big data for predictive modeling such that we can begin to, I think Michael talked about safety. We're now focusing a lot more on safety. We've created this thing called the High Injury Network, which basically is data that shows where the high incidence of crashes and collisions occur, such that we can begin to address those. And we're finding that that also becomes an equity issue. So using technology to identify where high crashes are is also enabling us to focus on some equity issues such that we're trying to solve both at the same time. And so there's a lot of use of technology that we're beginning to find as a result of just looking to see what the needs of our various communities are and allowing them then to be able to sort of operate at a world-class level. Now, I'll just end with one more note. So we have this thing called the Regional Data Platform. The Regional Data Platform is essentially a data hub that we've created. We have data on every single one of our cities and counties up to the parcel level, but they don't have the staff capacity to do anything with it. So we set up this GIS data platform, and each city is given a license. We paid for it for a few years, such that they can access that data and then be able to do planning work. They can generate their general plans from it if they really want to. It's that sophisticated. So that's one really final element of the use of technology that we brought to our planning process in the SCAG region.
That's fantastic, Comey. You have a lot of stuff going on. Did everybody hear that? 19 million people daily, that network that you're processing, let that number sink in, right? The largest MPO really in the nation. Grace, how is the changing technology impacting your long-range transportation plan in Cleveland? What's going on with that plan?
Sure. So, before I get into that, even though 19 million people is a lot of people, in Cleveland we have 166 villages, townships, and cities. When you add other governmental jurisdictions like the metro parks and the transit agencies, we have more members than there are sovereign nations in the world. So that is our claim to fame. Lots of government and lots of government to organize, which brings us to our long-range plan. So the long-range plan, as Michael noted, is a federal requirement. It's a 20-year plus plan that helps us to solve problems regarding transportation. And transportation is not in and of itself anything about going just from point A to point B. You go from point A to point B for reasons. And that's where the housing comes into play, workforce development comes into play, economic development, and so forth. And so with our long-range plan, we're looking to solve the problems of transporting goods and people safely and efficiently. So what does technology have to do with that? In addition to everything Comey just said about big data and using data to do projections on travel demand and so forth, we're looking at our long-range plan sort of to tell us what's going to happen in 20 years, what's going to happen in 25 years. With technology, landscaping changing so fast, what's that going to mean for us? And in the normal world, probably prior to the 1990s when technology really started taking off with computers, we did a lot of things that just focused on basic travel demand modeling within our region, and it was a lot easier to determine what to include in your long-range plan. Now, not only do I have to do that, but I have to think about what technology is going to do to the forms of transportation. What about connected and autonomous vehicles? What about micromobility? What about ride sharing? What about all of these things that have come up in the last 2 decades? How is that going to impact the way people travel? And travel for what purposes? And then things like telecommuting. Technology has allowed us now to not have to go into the office as much. Does that reduce vehicle miles traveled? How does that impact what we expect to look at in terms of congestion and congestion management? So those are all really important things that are impacting our long-range plan. Normally, we look at access, we look at mobility, we look at safety, we look at emissions, and we look at asset management. Those are 5 of our 6 goals of our transportation long-range plan. Do you know what our 6th is? Technology adaptation. It's really critical. It impacts all of the rest of them. So, we're thinking about that, and then in terms of the strategies, I mentioned connected autonomous vehicles, I mentioned micromobility and ride sharing. Things like long-distance travel, such as a Hyperloop, which is really another generation or the next generation of high-speed rail. You've got Brightline here, which has also changed the landscape. But anytime you have technology of that nature that can move people and goods so fast, it changes what we believe are regions. So metropolitan planning organizations represent regions. So we have cities that are our main home city, and then you have all of the region around it that feeds it, particularly economically. Now you've changed what region means. If I can get from Cleveland to Chicago in 40 minutes, which is what a Hyperloop or high-speed rail would do, now that's totally different. I can get a job in Chicago and live in Cleveland or vice versa. It changes how you look at regions. It changes how we work together. It changes how we share the assets, particularly the infrastructure assets of those 2 regions. They become a mega region. And so those are the kind of things that we're looking at in the long-range plan relative to technology.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. I feel from the perspective of Florida, since we're all dealing with these issues, some of the things, in addition to everything that we've just discussed, in Florida, we have a strong history of public-private partnerships, and we're currently involved in demonstration or pilot projects at Orlando and Tampa, Jacksonville, Miami, and from the long-range transportation plan perspective, we're really in a space, all of us, where we're kind of toggling between what is technology that exists today that we can be, deploying today to help our network, while also getting ready for what's emerging, about to be reality, and what's coming up in the future. So we're constantly working within that 5-year fiscally constrained immediate plan and that long-range plan. So those are the type of conversations that we have going on. What's out there that's currently in use in another industry that we haven't connected the dots that we can be using in transportation to help us today, while we're partnering and testing out technology for tomorrow. So Michael, moving over to you, some of the challenges that we face as our agencies, we know how we're using technology to plan for the future, but talk to us about some of the challenges in your region, and if there's any element of technology across the spectrum that you feel is helpful in looking at potential solutions in your region.
Sure. We have good problems, and well, like everyone, good problems and bad problems. Our good problem is our automotive industry is coming back. So we have 2 big 3 auto manufacturers coming to both do assembly and battery production. It's going to amount, as we project out to 2030, roughly Illinois has been losing population. We've been losing congressional seats, right? We lose population in Illinois. We're going to, as a market of 800,000 people, we're going to grow 20% in the next 8 years. There will be about 30,000 new jobs created between now and 2031, and my housing occupancy is at about 98%. So where are all those people going to live? We have nowhere for people to live, so then that feeds into, and this is the good problem, that feeds into the travel demand model that we all have, and we look at that travel demand and say, what is the new commuting pattern and how far people have to travel from their house to their place of employment. We then send all that information into an economic impact model, and that economic impact model is again going to say for every $100 million spent on infrastructure, here's your maximum economic impact. So we have good news on the horizon in Illinois, outside of Chicago, that we have a lot of industry coming back to Northern Illinois to employ our workforce. The bad problem is, and this is a problem that I think affects all of us, you don't hear about it much when you're watching national politics. You're probably not going to hear about it much in an election year, but our National Highway Trust Fund is broke. It is insolvent. And that is not just for highways, that's for transit, even though it's called Highway Trust Fund. I think we're going to be at about $250 billion in the hole by 2033, so in about 9 years. The gas tax funds that right now that we all pay at 18.4 cents. They would have to double it to make us whole and break even by 2033. And they basically bailed the trust fund out since 2000, since a millennium, at about $250 billion, so out of the general fund. So right now it's general fund money paying for it, it's not the gas tax, so I'm sure we'll hear about it today, but why we need a vehicle mileage tax and what that looks like, versus just working off of gasoline and taxing gasoline. So I think one of our biggest challenges is that we all look at the next 20, 30 years in our long-range plan, we develop a theoretical budget for, okay, again, very hard to predict. Here's what it's going to cost, and we show a gap of financing as far as, here's the revenue we can identify versus the revenue we need based on the cost to construct and the inflation of the cost to construct. I say all that because we're here to talk about bringing technology to our communities, bringing technology to our mobility, and putting infrastructure down that is smart. There's a cost to that. And so as a planning organization, I would challenge the room and challenge this industry to understand that insolvency is on the horizon for how the federal government pays for infrastructure. That's just to maintain the system we have. So the private sector really has to
develop not just the technological innovation, but an innovation to all of us on how it's going to pay for itself. Government is going to struggle to pay for it because we're struggling to pay for our current system. So how do we innovate and bring our current system to the standard we want it to be with your technology, and how does that save us money? So I guess that's the biggest challenge that I see as we try to take care of what we already have.
Excellent summary. That's really a national concern, something we all share across, our regions. But Grace, what's a particular challenge right now in your region that you're dealing with in your plan that you might see some form of technology being a part of the solution?
So one of the things that I will say, in building off of what Michael just said, our long-range plan deals with not only maintaining infrastructure, but building infrastructure and then paying for that infrastructure. And the way we have been paying for that infrastructure, particularly at the federal level, is gas taxes. The 18.4 cents that was just mentioned has not been increased since 1993. So there's a huge deficit there in what people are actually paying to use the infrastructure. That's a big challenge. So not just we don't have enough money. Why do we not have enough money? We don't have enough money because people don't recognize what they're paying. How many people knew that they paid 18.4 cents per gallon of gas every time they go to the gas pump? A few people. Well, you're kind of in the industry, so it's not necessarily fair. But even then, it wasn't that many. How about then, because it hasn't been raised since 1993, the states have had to come in, and the states have doubled and tripled their amounts. So now in Ohio, for example, we have 18.4 cents at the federal level, and we have 39 cents at the state level. And so even there, then, you get the money. And I'm going to say it's not just about raising the money, because in Ohio now we have generally somewhat sufficient. I won't say extremely sufficient, because depending on how the money is divided up, who gets it. But let's talk about how the money is divided up. The money is divided up in the same way it's collected, as a proxy for equity and a proxy for taxation. So you collect the money based on what you think people are using. The gallon per gas is expected to kind of mirror your use based on mileage driven, which is then based on the per gallon, which is based on the kind of automobile you drive and whether it's an electric vehicle, what the efficiency is, et cetera. And then in terms of how funding is distributed once it's collected, also focuses on equity, or at least it tries to. Let's divide up the money for cities and for counties and for MPOs and whoever has a stake or an ownership component of the transportation system. But it is intended to be fair and equitable, but it's really not. It's just a proxy for that. So where does technology come into play? In Ohio, we're looking at alternative revenue mechanisms to supplant or at least to supplement, I should say it's both, to supplant and supplement the gas tax. What we're looking at are things such as the RUC, the road user charge, also called the motor vehicle usage fee, or, there's a number of different names for it, but essentially charging people based on what they use. And then I suggest, our MPO is suggesting, we take it that step farther and say not only do you charge based on the mileage people are driving, which technology is needed to do that, but you return the money to the communities or the owners of the roadways based on the usage. And that, again, can only be done with technology. Even toll roads, they're closed. You can certainly measure some of the transportation usage on a toll road, and then you're compensating the toll road, but that's a minority of the roadways in the United States. In Ohio, we have one toll road, and that's it. So how do you get everyone who's driving on the rest of the roadways to pay for what they use? What we have found is people want to pay for their fair share. They really do. We did a lot of work around public engagement in the study that we just completed in Ohio. People are willing to pay for what they use, and they're willing to pay it as long as it's fair. So consumers consider things like the weight of a vehicle, consider things like the equity in terms of people who are low income. Think of the cost and what that would mean for certain families. So putting all those things together, technology is really going to help us get to the point where, whether it's your phone or whether it's some plug-in instrument to your car, we'll be able to charge for what people use and then return it to those communities so they can maintain and build additional roadways. With all the additional information that we get from your phone or from this instrument, we'd be able to tell, for example, are you driving within congestion? And if you're driving within congestion, what would it look like if we built out another lane, and how long would it take for that lane then to become obsolete because of additional usage? So there's a lot of predictive analytics that we'll use, and I think it's a bright future ahead with technology and transportation.
Thank you for that, Grace. Outstanding. You really walked us through at the core exactly what we're facing. Before I jump over to Comey, I'm going to take an informal survey with this crowd right here. For those of us that are old enough to remember, raise your hand if you ever imagined that you would be paying for TV. You would be paying for your service to be able to turn on your TV at night, that one day you'd be paying for that TV set. Did anybody ever imagine? Is there anyone here that's not paying for your TV the moment you turn it on? Who here paid? The moment you turn on your TV is because you're paying for a subscription to watch it? All right, so the way that we're paying for things, the way that we're moving through things, all right, so that's an informal survey. We'll take another one. Who here informally, we won't hold you to this, you can remain nameless, would be willing to look at transportation as a utility and approach the pricing of that as utility, i.e. utility in terms of electricity, utility in terms of your cell. How many of you would be willing to look at transportation as utility and price it out? Kayla. Now, I'm taking off my hat as Executive Director of TPO. This is not representative of my agency's opinion, but I have one last survey for you. How many of you would be willing to forego all gas tax in lieu of a utility tax on your cell phone bill? On your cell phone telecommunications bill. If you ever look at your cell phone bill, whoever looks at your cell phone bill is an automatic payment. There's a lot of taxes on there. You're paying for fire, you're paying for police, you're paying a lot of taxes. Anybody here would be willing to consider transportation utility tax on your cell phone, automatic, perhaps? All right, unofficial survey, thank you. Comey, tell us about a particular issue. You've got, listen, you lead the nation, you set the trend, we see what's coming, you tackle all these issues so that by the time it gets to our, mid-sized region compared to you, we know how to handle them. What's a top challenge you're facing right now, and what's a technology that might be a part of that solution?
Well, I think Michael and Grace really covered the funding issue well, because that's a preeminent issue for all regions, and ours no less. I just want to put one fine point on the funding issue. At the rate we're going, based on the gas tax, we've estimated that our region, at the local level, this is just the cities and counties in the SCAG region, will be losing, in terms of buying power, about $93 billion between now and the end of our plan year. And so that's a compelling reason why we need to move away from the gas tax and move to a more mileage-based user fee. So it's a red light warning right now. We can't afford our transportation system anymore. We haven't been able to afford it in the past, so a lot of our counties in our region actually have a sales tax in addition to the gas tax to fund projects in our region, essentially. I think the one problem or challenge I think we face in our region that's probably more of an existential challenge is housing. I use the example that in the SCAG region we have about 26, maybe 27 four-year universities, world-class four-year universities. Around this time of the year, they graduate thousands and thousands of young talent. Guess what happens? They all move out of the LA region, out of the Southern California region. And I think it's existential in the sense that the reason we are a vital economic region is because of, we have great weather for one thing. But it's also because we have the talent pool that attracts businesses to such that it makes us the 15th largest economy in the world. We're losing that capacity to keep that talent there because of the housing crisis that we're faced with. To build a unit, just to get a unit done in the LA region, in the Southern California region right now, is anywhere between $700,000 to $800,000. That's the cost of a unit. And so to make it affordable, there has to be some subsidization by government such that it can come down to a more affordable level, or what we call workforce housing. So this is an existential issue, and I don't even know if technology is the solution, but the things that we're looking at in terms of technology right now is manufactured homes, things that will bring a rapid construction or production of housing into play, streamlining permitting. One of the things that we did with our Future Communities Initiative was to streamline permit process through jurisdictions, and we had a few jurisdictions that took us up on it, where they were able to cut down permitting from 7, 8, 9 months down to maybe 3 months. Now that's a significant savings, but also reducing the permit load on the units. There are some jurisdictions in the Southern California region where the permit per unit is between $70,000 to $100,000 just to permit a unit to get it done. And so these are the challenges that we see that are out there, and trying to find ways to optimize the production process of housing is a very big deal for us in the Southern California region. We are working on, we got a grant from the federal government, from the state government, to sort of help cities with their housing issues, and we're in kind of a hiatus right now because the governor that gave us the money is now taking the money back. And so we're fighting to see if that can be restored in the end as the budget is adopted. I think one last thing I'll just leave with you as a challenge that we face, and I don't know that I speak for all of us, but at least on my board, you begin to see some of the issues of the politics of the day also come into play. So we can't quite get to consensus on a lot of things anymore. At the sub-regional level, at the regional level, obviously at the state level, we're seeing at the national level. So our capacity to get things done, whether it's applying technology or making decisions, is also constrained by the politics of the day. And so that continues to be an issue that permeates, I think, across all political levels as well.
Excellent, Komi. Wow. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience, but before we do, I'll tell you one top challenge that we have specifically here in our region, and even more specifically to Miami-Dade County, which is the most populous county in the state of Florida. State of Florida, third most populous state in the nation. So it's really getting a handle and understanding the population growth. Not only is state of Florida generally growing, but specifically our region and specifically Miami-Dade County. And the census information we have does not really reflect the true population. A lot of this has to do with current migration coming into our community. And so one way we're using technology is by doing cell phone survey at 2 a.m., kind of the middle of the night. And we can see what number, and we can compare the total number of cell phones at 2 a.m. compared to the population census that tells us what we actually have. And there is a huge disparity, a huge difference in those numbers. And we don't even have to see that data to know that our population forecasting is really off. We're in a tremendous growth that really is unprecedented for some time that we have not seen. So all of us, our core mission is planning for the future, and understanding what that growth looks like is critical, is mission critical. So that's an example of how we're using technology. But I'm going to open it up to anyone that might have a question for one of our experts here. And I saw your hand go up first. Can you say it kind of loud, or is there a microphone?
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Sorry about that.
Hello.
Hello.
So my name is James Martitas. I'm a graduating senior from the Florida State University and a native to Miami. And I am looking at moving back to Miami. and trying to make that possible while starting a career, and obviously it's very expensive. So I was wondering, to prevent the brain drain that you were talking about earlier and continuing our development as a city, what kind of solutions would you give to me, I don't know, to make it possible? Like, what can we do to keep the students in Miami?
Well, since I'm going to recruit you first to Miami, but I'll let Comey try in LA as well. Well, listen, these are all great regions to live in, and congratulations on graduating. Listen, there are areas in Florida, specifically here in Miami-Dade County, quite frankly, where you can be car optional. So I would say one way to help you in terms of transitioning, in terms of cost, we all know how much it costs in your household to have a car. People don't understand or don't really think about the fact that roadways are a double subsidy. Out of one pocket, you're paying taxes directly for that road, and out of the other pocket, you're paying all the expenses to have a car, insurance, maintenance, and everything you need to use the infrastructure that you're paying the government to maintain for you. So you have subsidies coming out of both pockets. So that's an expense if you choose. It may be downtown Miami, in an urban core area where you have access to public transportation. You can kind of save that cost. And that's really like the number one thing from this panel that you're going to get. And as far as housing, Miami-Dade County is a big push and really a national leader in terms of workforce housing affordability, which is one step beyond just affordable housing. And so we have ordinances that have been passed, and in fact, our elected officials that are participating today were part of that push to create rapid transit zones, where we're looking at transit-oriented communities, which is one step beyond transit-oriented design, where you can actually live in a community-based transit-oriented prototype where you're car optional and you have all of your needs from a community perspective within reach, and where you have a first last mile network that is also car optional, safe bikeways, pedestrian, micromobility. So I would encourage you to look for those areas. One last thing, and we all have it here in technology, telecommuting. That's a technology-based solution, and if you can find a career that allows you to telecommute. And I'm going to go over to Michael because he has some issues going on in terms of the changes in land use in your region. So I wanted to ask you, and we have a question up front, was some of this as a result of telecommuting, some of the shifts in your land use?
There, I got it. We are seeing from what would be considered downtown Chicago, we are seeing an influx of residents from the city of Chicago, and that is because of COVID, right? We love blaming COVID, but yeah, people are now able to telecommute into their jobs in Chicago, start a family, have a bigger yard, live a suburban life, or live in our urban environment, like I said, in a former office tower at half the price of what they would in Chicago. So telecommuting has brought housing demand to us.
Excellent. Technology. We had a question up front. We have just a minute left, but I want to give you the last question.
Hi, my name is Diana Mendez, and I'm a procurement law attorney with Bills and Somber. And I represent a lot of clients with public-private partnerships, and I was wondering if that's something that you're seeing as a potential way of funding some of these projects. And also, second question is, we heard a lot about the Infrastructure Act and all of the money that's supposed to be coming out of the Act. And so I hear today that we are also having issues with funding and, with changing to electrification of cars. How's the implementation of the Infrastructure Act going for you? I'm
not doing it. I'll let Grace do transportation, Comey. We're doing DBFOM on solar, EV charging stations, and housing. We're not doing DBFOM, and nobody in Illinois is on roads. I don't know if you are.
I can say that public-private partnerships have been, I think, falsely dangled out there for decades as the answer to transportation infrastructure funding. It is not. It is an excellent tool for financing infrastructure projects, but you still have to have a revenue source in order to cover the actual debt service payments. So is it a good tool in the toolbox? Yes. Is it the answer to everything? No. And so do I see more of them? I think we see the same, at least I've seen the same amount as always, wherever it fits, It fits nicely wherever it doesn't, it doesn't. It fits great with mega projects where a organization, whether it be the state DOT, although you're looking at here, one of the largest states in the union. What'd you say yours was? California's got to be first or second? First. You're third. We're seventh, you're sixth. I mean, you're looking at states that have a lot of capacity to do things, but yet still, when there's a mega project that looks at the cost over time, over a long range of 30 years, that's when a good opportunity comes in, but also recognize that the public sector is there to make a profit. Their mission is different than government's. Not that it's a bad thing, it's not a bad thing, but they can be used as a great partner to be able to exercise some of the new opportunities that are brought to us because of technology.
Yeah, P3s are great for getting projects done. I think it's a real great tool for project delivery on mega projects, and but those represent like a very small percentage of the total projects that we have that we need to get done. We have about 6,000 projects in my regional plan. I would imagine that maybe 4 of them might qualify for a P3 out of the 6,000 projects. Now, keep in mind, our plan is about $750 billion of projects. At least 60% of that is for O&M, because people always assume that the transportation of the future is something mystical that we haven't seen before. It's already here. The transportation of the future is the roads that are here that will still continue to be used by new, different technology, electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. We have to maintain those roads and bridges, and most of those don't lend themselves to public-private partnership. I think we need to look at P3s for some of our O&M capacities. So there's opportunities there, because I think there is a certain discipline that private equity brings to the table that we don't tap into as much as we could. But without question, like Grace said, whether you engage P3s or not, you still have to have the back end, the backstop, which is public funding from somewhere.
Well, excellent. I'd like to thank my panelists. Thank you for this amazing discussion today. Thank you, audience, for participating. We appreciate you. Thank you.